publicly, the Trump administration is not concerned about the looming fractures within the GOP. And a White House official told at CNBC that the defectors represent just a tiny fraction of congressional Republicans. Quote, Republicans aren't always going to have the same views as the president. Trump also appears to have escalated his rhetoric against Cuba today, posting, there will be no more oil or money going to Cuba, zero. I strongly suggest they make a deal before it's too late. Joining us now is Republican California Congressman Kevin Kiley, who also serves on the Judiciary Committee. Congressman Kiley, thanks for joining us this morning. I want to ask you about that not-so-veiled threat that the president issued on his social media platform this morning. Is this something that you support? Because this looks a lot like what we saw, although in a very condensed amount of time, the lead up to Venezuela, which led to now a takeover of the country and an ousting of the leader. Is that something you support in Cuba? And depending on your answer here, do you think Congress needs to act now to rein Trump in on this?
Well, the president, of course, has his own way of conducting diplomacy and defending American interests. And I don't think it's any secret that we have, certain countries in the region that have been hostile to U.S. interests. I also think it is indisputable that Maduro was someone who caused immense harm and suffering to his own people, as well as to our own citizens who engaged in narco trafficking for many, many years. And that regardless of, whatever disagreement you might have on both sides of the aisle about how we got to this point, there is an opportunity going forward to establish a much better state of affairs for the people of that country and for the entire Western Hemisphere.
Okay, but yes, no. Do you support a takeover of Cuba?
Of course, you can't speak in those sort of absolutes when we're coming to diplomacy. I know
we just saw that happen exactly in Venezuela. We are now running the country.
The president is using the tools at his disposal to try to protect American interests in the region.
Congressman, to Jackie's question, should you, the members of Congress, figure out a war powers resolution to make sure that President Trump doesn't do in Cuba what he did to Venezuela?
Well, of course, as a member of the House, I always think that we should have Congress be as involved as possible, particularly when it comes to matters of such profound strategic importance. And the administration was on the Hill this last week. I participated in a lengthy briefing both about, the situation that transpired in Venezuela and what the path moving forward will be. And so I've said, and I said immediately after the action on January 3rd, that Congress needs to be centrally involved moving forward. Whether the war powers resolution is the right mechanism for that, I don't know that that's entirely clear, but I do believe that Congress needs to be centrally involved when it comes to the situation in Venezuela and the region more broadly.
Congressman, I take your points about the awfulness of the Maduro regime and that a lot of people are really happy that he's gone. But how are things going to change in Venezuela if only Maduro was removed and his lieutenants and Chavismo are still ever present in the country?
Yeah, well, of course, for the durable future and hopefully the not too distant future, we will see a transition to a durable and self-determining situation for the people of Venezuela, a democracy.
Oh, Congressman, can you tell us how is that going to happen? Have you heard things from the administration about how that transition is going to happen, when it's going to happen, and who's going to be leading it?
Yeah, so, the imperative right now, of course, is just stability. When you have, the ostensible head of state who's suddenly no longer there, there are, of course, myriad risks that could emerge. And so I think the focus in the very short term has been on stabilizing the situation. And I think that then the steps, and this is where I say Congress also needs to be centrally involved in whatever the role of the United States is here, in bringing about a functioning democracy in that country. So ultimately, it's the people of Venezuela that determine their own future.
Congressman, I'm sorry to dominate the conversation. I have to get you on one more thing. In an interview with the New York Times, the President of the United States was asked what was guiding him in terms of his foreign policy, or what limits there are on how he conducts foreign policy on behalf of the United States. And he said, "My own morality, my own mind." Is that an acceptable answer to you from the President of the United States?
Well, I assume what he means is that within the framework of what his constitutional powers are there. Of course, we have a separation of powers in this country. Now, it is true
Does he
that
respect
the
that?
president
Does the President of the United States respect
the
separation of powers?
Then there is abundant inherent power to protect U.S. interests. And in the case of Venezuela, this was actually first and foremost a law enforcement operation that was responsible for bringing someone to justice within a different branch of government within the judiciary. And so I will say that as a member of the House of Representatives, the separation of powers and safeguarding Article 1 is absolutely foundationally, centrally important to the way I view my job, which is why I said in the wake of what happened in Venezuela, where leading up to it, of course, there was the need for this element of surprise to protect our service members in the mission. But going forward, Congress absolutely needs to be centrally involved.
Congressman Kiley, I want to return to Cuba because I do think we need to be really following closely what the administration, the repeated comments and statements they're making on Cuba and what that might amount to. Can you characterize the Republican Party's posture towards Cuba, whether or not you and the party support drone strikes in Cuba and a potential ousting of the regime that is in place there? Because when you are listening to Marco Rubio and to reading Donald Trump's social, it is hard not to imagine that they are planning something akin to what just took place in Venezuela. So I know that you don't want to talk in absolutes, but we just saw this play out in real time.
Well, I don't think you can characterize the party as having one monolithic position, and I think there are some Republicans who will agree with some Democrats on, on a particular view, and then there's another view that might be supported by people in both parties as well. I think you will find widespread agreement from folks on both sides that the regime there is not friendly towards U.S. interests, that they collaborated very closely with Venezuela, which resulted in untold drugs and other harm coming to our own citizens. We have a very volatile situation in many parts of the world right now. And so, I don't know that saying exactly what the proper course is in any given situation when it comes to tactics is necessarily the best thing. What I do think is important is that
what we're seeing is drone strikes over and over again in different parts of the world. Do you support drone strikes in Cuba?
Can you say it again?
Do you support drone strikes in Cuba?
Well, drone strikes have been used by presidents, all pretty recent presidents, to defend U.S. interests in targeted ways. So you can't really answer that question in a general way. It, of course, would depend upon the legal basis and whether U.S. interests are implicated and the myriad other considerations that go into these things.